Black Maid was forced and paid to marry a muscular, wealthy CEO. Then she gave him an heir. He studied her for a long moment, like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person in pain. Then he did something that changed both their lives forever. Would you take money from someone who looked down on you if it meant saving your family? Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She signed her name on a contract that made her a millionaire's wife for exactly 12 months, until the night he destroyed her in front of everyone who mattered. The humiliation burned deeper than the champagne someone threw at her designer dress. But what Mason Drake didn't know was that Alana Brooks had been recording everything. Have you ever been so desperate that you'd sell your dignity for survival? Have you ever worked for someone who treated you like furniture until they needed something from you? Tonight, we're exposing what happens when the powerful think they own people. Stick around to see how a maid from Georgia brought a Texas oil empire to its knees. 6 months earlier, Alana's hand shook as she held the medical bills. Her mother's cancer treatment costs stared back at her like a death sentence written in numbers. Working 3 jobs in Dallas barely covered rent, let alone chemotherapy that cost more than most people's cars. The marble floors of Mason Drake's penthouse reflected the city lights like scattered coins, beautiful, cold, and completely out of reach for someone like her. She'd been cleaning his 30-floor high-rise for 2 years, invisible to the man who owned half of Texas oil fields. Mason Drake was everything she'd learned to avoid. Arrogant, entitled, and dangerous in the way that only comes with unlimited money and zero consequences. "You missed a spot," he'd say, pointing at surfaces that gleamed like mirrors. Never please, never thank you, just commands delivered without looking up from his phone. Alana would nod, scrub harder, and dream about the day she'd never have to bow her head to another person's cruelty. That day came when her phone rang during her lunch break. "Miss Brooks, your mother's condition has worsened. We need to start immediate treatment, but insurance won't cover the experimental drugs. We're looking at about $400,000. For $100,000, she made $22,000 a year." Mason appeared in the kitchen doorway as she hung up, his 6-foot frame filling the space like he owned even the air around him. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his suit probably cost more than her car, and his green eyes held that cold calculation she'd seen him use during business calls. "Personal calls on my time?" he asked, but something in her expression made him stop. Maybe it was the tears she couldn't hide, or the way her shoulders shook with the weight of impossible choices. "My mother is dying," she whispered, "and I can't save her." He studied her for a long moment, like she was a problem to be solved rather than a person in pain. Then he did something that changed both their lives forever. "I have a proposition for you." The contract was typed on thick paper that smelled like leather and power. 12 months as his wife. Public appearances, social events, perfect behavior. In return, all her mother's medical bills paid, plus $1 million when their year ended. "You'll live here, act the part, and stay out of my business," Mason explained, his voice as cold as his handshake. "Think of it as a promotion from maid to actress. The role is loving wife. The audience is everyone who matters in Dallas society. The pay is your mother's life." Alana's pen hovered over the signature line. This man had watched her scrub his toilets without acknowledging her humanity, and now he wanted to buy her like expensive furniture. But her mother's face flashed in her mind, the woman who'd raised her alone, who'd worked double shifts so Alana could go to college, who deserved better than dying because her daughter couldn't afford to save her. The ink was still wet when Mason's fingers brushed hers, sending an unwelcome shiver down her spine. For 2 years, she convinced herself she felt nothing when he looked at her. Now, as his thumb traced across her knuckles, she realized she'd been lying to herself about more than just his indifference. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Drake," he murmured, and the way his voice dropped made her stomach flutter with something that felt dangerously close to desire. "Would you take money from someone who looked down on you if it meant saving your family? Drop a money bag emoji if you do anything for the people you love." As she signed the contract, Mason's hand covered hers. "1 year, Mrs. Drake," he whispered against her ear. "Try not to embarrass me." If only he knew that by the end of those 12 months, he'd be the one begging. She moved into his world of marble and gold. But Mason Drake forgot one crucial detail. Maids learn all the secrets of the houses they clean. The transformation happened in stages, like watching a butterfly emerge from a cocoon made of credit cards and designer labels. The boutique smelled like leather and ambition as stylists draped her in fabrics that cost more than her mother's monthly medication. Mason sat in the corner, supposedly reading emails, but she caught him watching her reflection in the mirrors. "Turn around," the stylist commanded, pinning a midnight blue dress that hugged every curve Alana had learned to hide under baggy uniforms. The fabric whispered against her skin like secrets, and when she looked up, Mason's phone was forgotten in his lap. "Better," he said, but his voice had changed. The dismissive tone was gone, replaced by something that made her pulse quicken. "I clean up well," she replied, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "I always did. You just never bothered to notice." The dress fit like it was designed for her body, specifically. The stylist explained that Mason had provided her exact measurements. Information he shouldn't have known unless he'd been paying closer attention than she'd realized. Heat crept up her neck as she wondered when he'd memorized the curve of her waist, the length of her legs. "We need to work on your story," Mason said during the drive to their first public appearance. "We met at a charity event. Love at first sight. Keep it simple." Alana watched Dallas blur past the window of his Mercedes. "What if someone asks about my background? You're a college graduate who volunteers with underprivileged communities. Everything else is private. So I'm still helping poor people, just with better clothes?" His jaw tightened. "You're my wife now. That comes with certain expectations." The charity gala buzzed with wealth and competition disguised as philanthropy. Women in diamonds whispered behind jeweled hands while men discussed oil prices over aged whiskey. Alana had served at events like this, invisible in her black uniform. Now she stood beside Mason in designer silk, and suddenly everyone wanted to know her story. "How lovely that Mason found someone so authentic," said Mrs. Patterson, the oil commissioner's wife. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Thank you," Alana replied smoothly. "I find authenticity works better than pretense, don't you?" Mason's hand found the small of her back, a gesture that looked protective but felt possessive. His touch sent electricity racing up her spine, and she had to concentrate on breathing normally. Throughout the evening, she watched him work the room like a master musician playing a familiar song. He knew exactly what each person wanted to hear, which jokes would land, which compliments would open wallets for the children's hospital fundraiser. It was manipulation, but it was brilliant manipulation that raised $2 million in 3 hours. "You're good at this," she murmured during a quiet moment by the bar. "At what?" "Making people feel special while you take their money." He turned to study her, and she realized she'd said something that surprised him. "Is that what you think I'm doing to you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Around them, the party continued its glittering dance of power and pretense. But in their small bubble by the bar, something real flickered to life. "I haven't decided yet," she admitted. His smile was different this time. Not the practice charm he'd used all evening, but something genuine that reached his eyes. "Good. Keep me guessing. Have you ever had someone underestimate you completely? Share a time when you shocked someone with your capabilities." At their first charity gala, she overheard his business partner mention a hostile takeover. Mason didn't know she was listening or that she understood exactly what it meant for his company. She played the role so perfectly that Mason almost forgot it was an act, until she reminded him why underestimating her was his first mistake. The country club's crystal chandelier cast rainbow shadows across her skin as she charmed investors who would have ignored her months ago. 3 weeks into their arrangement, Alana had mastered the art of being Mason Drake's wife. She knew which fork to use for which course, which topics would interest the oil executives' wives, and exactly how to smile when someone made a comment that would have gotten them slapped in her old neighborhood. But what she hadn't expected was how good she'd become at reading a room. "The Henderson deal is falling through," she heard Mason's partner whisper during cocktail hour. "Environmental groups are sniffing around the drilling sites. If this goes public before the merger." Alana sipped her champagne and filed the information away. She'd learned that powerful men talked freely around beautiful women, especially when they assumed those women were decoration rather than competition. "Mrs. Drake, you simply must share your secret," gushed Caroline Morrison, the mayor's wife. "Mason seems so much more relaxed these days." "Happy wife, happy life," Alana replied with a practiced laugh. "Though I think the secret is just paying attention to what matters to him." Across the room, Mason was in deep conversation with 3 board members, their faces creased with worry. She excused herself from the ladies' circle and glided over to his side, slipping her hand into his with the kind of casual intimacy that married couples displayed without thinking. "Gentlemen," she said warmly, "I hope you're not talking business at such a lovely party. Just discussing some environmental concerns," one of them said dismissively. "Nothing for you to worry about." Alana's smile never wavered, but her grip on Mason's hand tightened slightly, their agreed signal that she had something important to share later. "Oh, environmental issues are fascinating," she said brightly. "Did you know that companies implementing proactive sustainability measures see an average stock price increase of 12%? Investors love businesses that solve problems before they become scandals." The 3 men stared at her with the kind of shock usually reserved for talking pets. Mason's eyes widened, but he recovered quickly. "My wife has a business degree," he said smoothly. "She's been reviewing some of our operational strategies." "Really?" said the oldest board member, his tone shifting from dismissive to interested. "What else have you noticed, Mrs. Drake?" For the next 20 minutes, Alana outlined a comprehensive environmental initiative that would cost less than fighting lawsuits and generate positive press that could boost the merger negotiations. She spoke with confidence born from years of watching these men make decisions that affected thousands of lives, finally understanding that she was smart enough to make better choices than most of them. When they walked away to discuss her suggestions, Mason pulled her onto the dance floor. "Where did that come from?" he murmured against her ear as they swayed to the orchestra music. "You think I spent 2 years cleaning your office without reading the papers on your desk?" she replied, her body fitting against his like they'd been dancing together for years instead of weeks. His hand tightened on her waist. "You've been spying on me? I've been learning from you. There's a difference." The song ended, but neither of them stepped away. Standing there in his arms, surrounded by people who saw them as the perfect couple, Alana felt something dangerous blooming in her chest. This was supposed to be business, a transaction, but the way Mason looked at her now, like she was a mystery he wanted to solve rather than a problem he'd paid to fix, made her forget why that distinction mattered. "When was the last time you surprised yourself with what you were capable of? Tell me about a moment you exceeded your own expectations." When Victoria Ashford, Mason's ex-fiancée, returned from Paris with marriage back on her mind, she took one look at Alana and smiled like a predator who'd found wounded prey. Mason's past walked back into his life, wearing Chanel and carrying secrets that could destroy everything Alana had built. Victoria Ashford moved through Mason's penthouse like she owned it, touching surfaces that Alana had once cleaned, claiming spaces that now belonged to someone else. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulders, her red lips curved in a smile that promised trouble, and her blue eyes assessed Alana like a buyer examining merchandise. "So this is the famous Mrs. Drake," Victoria purred, extending a manicured hand. "I've heard so much about you." Alana shook the offered hand, noting how Victoria's grip lingered just long enough to be uncomfortable. "All good things, I hope." "Oh, fascinating things." Victoria's smile sharpened. Mason always did have interesting taste in charity cases. The words hit like a physical blow, but Alana kept her expression neutral. She'd dealt with women like Victoria before, wealthy, entitled, and convinced that money made them untouchable. The difference was that this one had history with her husband. Mason appeared from his office, his face carefully blank in a way that meant he was furious. "Victoria, I thought you were in Paris." But I kept thinking about what we discussed before I left." Victoria glided to his side like water seeking its level. "About how some mistakes can be corrected if you're willing to pay the price. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Alana watched Mason's jaw tighten, saw the way Victoria's hand brushed against his arm with practiced familiarity, and understood that she was witnessing a conversation that had started long before she entered the picture. "That was 6 months ago," Mason said carefully. "Things change, do they?" Victoria's gaze flicked to Alana with obvious dismissal. "Some things are temporary, darling. Others are inevitable." After Victoria left in a cloud of expensive perfume and veiled threats, the penthouse felt different. Smaller, like her presence had poisoned the air they breathed. "Want to tell me what that was about?" Alana asked, finding Mason standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Dallas. "Ancient history," he replied without turning around. That didn't feel ancient. He turned then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach clench with an emotion she didn't want to name. "Victoria and I were engaged 2 years ago. She called it off when she decided I wasn't ambitious enough for her standards. And now I'm worth 3 times what I was then, and suddenly her standards have evolved." Alana moved closer, drawn by something raw in his voice. "Is that what you want? Her back?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Mason's green eyes searched her face, looking for something she wasn't sure she wanted him to find. "A month ago, I would have said yes," he admitted. "Victoria represents everything I thought I wanted. Old money, social connections, a wife who fits seamlessly into my world. And now," instead of answering with words, he crossed the space between them in 2 quick steps. His hands cupped her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch, his thumbs stroking across her cheekbones like she was something precious. "Now I'm wondering why I ever thought fitting in was more important than standing out," he murmured, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss tasted like possession and promise, like a man claiming something he'd only just realized he wanted to keep. Alana's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed warnings about crossing lines they couldn't uncross. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "This complicates things," she whispered. "Good," he replied. "I'm tired of simple. Have you ever felt threatened by someone from your partner's past? How did you handle the competition?" Victoria's private investigator delivered the file with a smile. Every detail of Alana's life, including the contract terms. "Interesting bedtime reading," Victoria purred. "I wonder what the board would think." The night Mason Drake stopped seeing her as an employee and started wanting her as a woman, their carefully constructed boundaries went up in flames. Thunderstorms turned the Dallas skyline into a canvas of lightning and shadow, while inside the penthouse, different storms were brewing. Victoria's visit had shifted something between them, like an earthquake that leaves everything looking the same, but fundamentally changed. Alana found Mason in his study, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, staring at papers he wasn't actually reading. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, making him look younger and more vulnerable than the commanding CEO the world knew. "Can't concentrate?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, and the heat in his gaze made her pulse quicken. "Not on business." She entered the study, drawn by something in his voice that bypassed every logical reason she had for keeping her distance. The contract sat in the safe behind his desk, a constant reminder that this was all temporary, all pretense. But the way he watched her move across the room felt anything but fake. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk. "You," he said simply. "How you handle Victoria today. How you've handled everything these past weeks. How you make me forget that this was supposed to be simple." Lightning illuminated the windows, followed by thunder that shook the building. The storm outside seemed to echo the electricity crackling between them. "It was supposed to be simple," she agreed. "But nothing about you is simple, Mason Drake." He stood, moving around the desk until he was close enough to touch. "Say my name again." "Mason," she whispered, and watched his eyes darken with something that had nothing to do with the storm outside. When he kissed her this time, it was different from the desperate claim in the living room. This was slow, deliberate, a man taking time to savor something he'd been craving. Her hands found the buttons of his shirt, needing to touch skin, needing to confirm that the heat between them was real. "Are you sure?" he asked against her throat, his voice rough with restraint. Instead of answering with words, she pulled him down for another kiss, pouring every confused feeling into the connection between them. When he whispered her real name instead of Mrs. Drake, something shattered between them, not breaking but opening. "Alana," he breathed against her collarbone, "tell me this isn't just business anymore." Her answer came in the arch of her back, the grip of her fingers, the way she said his name like a prayer she'd been afraid to voice. They moved together like they'd been choreographed for this moment, every touch asking permission, every kiss answering questions they'd been too afraid to speak aloud. Later, as rain continued to paint patterns on the windows and her head rested on his chest, Alana felt the shift in her world like tectonic plates settling into new positions. This wasn't part of the contract. This wasn't safe. But as Mason's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder and his heartbeat steadied beneath her ear, she realized she was past caring about safety. What's scarier, keeping your heart safe or risking everything for someone who might break it? Share your thoughts on taking emotional risks. The pregnancy test showed 2 lines, but the timing couldn't be worse. Victoria had already scheduled her reveal for the company gala, the same night Alana planned to tell Mason about the baby that would change everything. She walked into that Houston ballroom as Mason Drake's wife and left as the most humiliated woman in Texas. But humiliation has a way of revealing who you really are. The Hilton Americas ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the kind of wealth that made ordinary people feel small. Alana's red dress hugged her curves like liquid fire. Her diamond earrings caught the light with every turn of her head, and for the first time in months, she felt truly beautiful. Mason's hand rested possessively on her waist as they worked the room, his pride in her obvious to everyone watching. "You look incredible tonight," he'd whispered in the car, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I have something important to tell you after the gala." She'd smiled, her own secret burning bright in her chest. The pregnancy test was hidden in her purse, waiting for the perfect moment to change their lives forever. What had started as a business arrangement was about to become a family. The first hour passed like a dream. Oil executives praised Mason's environmental initiatives, her ideas, though he made sure everyone knew she'd inspired the changes. Their fake marriage had become real partnership, and the respect in his colleagues' eyes when they looked at her felt better than any paycheck. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host announced, "we have a special guest tonight. Please welcome Victoria Ashford, recently returned from her European tour." Alana felt Mason's body tense beside her as Victoria glided onto the stage in white silk that made her look like an avenging angel. Her smile was perfect, practiced, and sharp enough to cut glass. "Thank you for such a warm welcome," Victoria began, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. "I have some fascinating news to share about one of our most prominent couples." The room fell silent as Victoria's gaze found them in the crowd. Alana's stomach dropped as she recognized the predatory gleam in those blue eyes. "You see, I've recently discovered the most romantic story," Victoria continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "A powerful CEO who is so desperate for the right image that he actually hired his maid to play his wife." Gasps rippled through the crowd like shockwaves. Alana felt the blood drain from her face as hundreds of eyes turned toward them, some shocked, others delighted by the scandal unfolding before them. "The contract is quite detailed," Victoria went on, pulling out papers that Alana recognized with growing horror. 12 months of marriage performance in exchange for $1 million. Quite generous for housekeeping services, don't you think? Mason's face had gone completely white. Instead of defending her, instead of calling Victoria a liar, he stood frozen like a deer caught in headlights. The man who could command boardrooms and negotiate million-dollar deals couldn't find words when it mattered most. "Is it true?" someone called out from the crowd. Mason started, then stopped, his gaze darting between Alana and the hundreds of faces staring at them expectantly. In that moment of hesitation, Alana saw their entire relationship crumble. She wasn't his wife. She wasn't his partner. She was still just a maid he dressed up and paraded around for show. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mason finally said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom, "I'd like you to meet my contract wife." The words hit her like physical blows. Contract wife. Not just his wife. Not the woman he loved. The employee he'd hired to play a role. Laughter started somewhere in the back of the room and spread like wildfire. Cruel, delighted laughter from people who were thrilled to see someone else's humiliation. Someone threw a champagne flute that shattered at her feet, splashing wine across her red dress like blood. "How much did he pay you, honey?" a woman called out. "Was it worth it?" Alana stood there for 10 seconds that felt like hours, letting the laughter and cruel comments wash over her. Then she did something that shocked everyone in that ballroom, including herself. She smiled. "You're absolutely right," she said, her voice somehow carrying despite not having a microphone. "I was his maid. I cleaned his toilets, scrubbed his floors, and took his dismissive comments for 2 years. And you know what I learned?" The laughter died as her voice grew stronger. "I learned that a woman's worth isn't determined by her job title or her bank account. It's determined by her character." And right now, looking around this room at people who think someone else's pain is entertainment, I'm proud to be different from all of you. She turned to Mason, who stood pale and silent beside her. "Thank you for showing me exactly who you are when it matters." Without another word, she walked through that crowd of Dallas elite with her head held high, her heels clicking against marble like a countdown to his destruction. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength to walk away with your head held high? As Alana drove away from the gala, mascara streaking her cheeks, she made 2 phone calls, one to her lawyer and one to a journalist who specialized in exposing powerful men's secrets. Mason had taught her that everything was a transaction. Now she was ready to collect. Mason Drake thought money could fix anything, until the woman he destroyed started taking apart his empire piece by piece. The Dallas Morning News headlines stretched across every newsstand in the city. Oil mogul's fake marriage. Inside the contract wife scandal. Below it, a photo of Alana walking out of the Houston gala with dignity intact while Mason stood frozen in the background like a coward. Mason's phone hadn't stopped ringing since 6 a.m. His publicist, his lawyers, his board members, everyone wanted to know how to contain the damage. But damage control was impossible when the woman holding the grenades had intimate knowledge of every weakness in his armor. "She's given 3 interviews in 2 days," his publicist reported during an emergency meeting. CNN, Good Morning America, and that podcast that just got 10 million downloads overnight. She's not just telling the story, she's controlling it. Mason stared at his laptop screen, watching Alana's interview replay for the 100th time. She looked beautiful under the studio lights, composed and articulate as she explained how a desperate woman had been forced to sell her dignity to save her dying mother. "I don't regret the contract," she told the interviewer. "I regret believing that respect could be bought along with performance. I regret thinking that someone who hired me to pretend to love him might actually be capable of the real thing." And the pregnancy rumors? Alana's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "Some things are private, but I will say this. Any child deserves a father who's proud to claim them, not someone who calls their mother a contract wife in front of a room full of strangers." The laptop snapped shut as Mason's assistant knocked on his office door. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. She says she's your wife." Hope flared in his chest until Alana walked through the door. Not his wife anymore. Not in any way that mattered. She wore a simple black dress that somehow made her look more powerful than all his designer suits combined. "Hello, Mason." "Alana." He stood, unsure whether to approach her or maintain distance. "Thank you for coming. I didn't come to forgive you." Her voice was steady, controlled. "I came to give you something." She placed an envelope on his desk with the kind of care usually reserved for explosives. "Divorce papers?" he asked. "Better." Her smile was sharp enough to cut. "Resignation from my role as your victim." Mason opened the envelope and felt his world tilt sideways. "Stock certificates." enough shares to make her the second largest stakeholder in his company. How did you? Remember those environmental initiatives I suggested? The ones that saved your merger and boosted your stock price by 30%? I used my contract payment to buy shares when they were still cheap. Turns out, when you pay attention during all those board meetings you drag your fake wife to, you learn when to invest. The implications hit him like a physical blow. You own 15% of my company. I own 15% of what used to be your company, she corrected. The board called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. They're concerned about leadership that makes such poor personal decisions. Apparently, publicly humiliating your wife doesn't inspire confidence in your judgment. Mason sank into his chair, finally understanding the scope of his destruction. What do you want? Justice, she replied simply. You taught me that everything has a price. You taught me that people can be bought and sold like property. You taught me that power comes from having something other people need. She leaned forward, her hands flat on his desk. Well, congratulations, Professor Drake. Your student learned the lesson perfectly. The door closed behind her with a soft click of a trap snapping shut. Do you believe in forgiveness or revenge? When someone humiliates you publicly, what's the best way to respond? When Mason's board called an emergency meeting to discuss his removal as CEO, Alana sat in the conference room as their new majority shareholder. Surprised to see me, darling? She asked, savoring the shock in his eyes. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but Alana Brooks preferred hers with a side of corporate takeover. The boardroom that once intimidated her now felt like her kingdom as she sat at the head of the table, making decisions that would reshape Mason's empire. 12 men in expensive suits who treated her like decoration now hung on her every word, because money had a way of making people listen. Gentlemen, she began, her voice carrying the authority that came with owning the largest block of voting shares. We need to discuss leadership changes. Mason sat at the opposite end of the table, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. 2 weeks ago, he'd been the undisputed king of this empire. Now he was fighting to keep his position while the woman he'd betrayed held his fate in her manicured hands. Mrs. Drake, said Harold Peterson, the board's longest-serving member, while we appreciate your investment in the company, we should discuss these matters privately. It's Ms. Brooks now, she corrected smoothly. And since I own 22% of this company as of this morning, I'd say these matters concern me directly. 22%. Mason's eyes widened as the number sank in. She'd been buying shares while he was dealing with the media circus, using the scandal to drive down prices and increase her position. How? He asked, the word barely a whisper. Turns out when your stock price drops 40% because of a public relations nightmare, it's an excellent time to buy, especially when you have inside information about upcoming environmental contracts that will boost revenue by $60 million next quarter. She slid a folder across the polished table. The Henderson deal didn't fall through. I made sure of that, along with 3 other contracts you thought were dead. Funny how quickly environmental groups become reasonable when someone who actually understands their concerns sits down to negotiate. The board members exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Here was a woman who'd solved problems their CEO couldn't handle, who'd turned a public scandal into a business opportunity, who commanded respect through competence rather than intimidation. What do you propose? Asked another board member. Co-CEO structure. Shared leadership. Mason handles operations. I handle strategy and public relations. The company gets stability, the public gets a redemption story, and shareholders get results. Mason's laugh was bitter. You want to work together? After everything? Alana stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Dallas. The same view she'd admired while cleaning these offices, now hers to command. I want to build something that matters, she said without turning around. You taught me that power shared is power multiplied. The question is, are you smart enough to accept partnership instead of demanding ownership? She turned back to face the room, her silhouette backlit by the city lights. Or would you rather explain to shareholders why you let pride cost them millions in potential profits? The vote was unanimous. 7 in favor, 1 abstention, Masons. After the board members filed out, They were alone in the conference room where so many of their fake marriage meetings had taken place. Now the dynamic had shifted completely. She held the power, and they both knew it. "This doesn't change what happened," Mason said quietly. "No, it doesn't." Alana gathered her papers with the efficiency of someone who had places to be. "But it changes what happens next." She paused at the door, looking back at the man who'd hired her to play a role and ended up creating his own replacement. "Board meeting next week. Try not to embarrass me." The echo of her heels in the hallway sounded like victory marching away from defeat. Have you ever been in a position where you could get revenge, but had to decide if it was worth it? What did you choose? As security escorted Mason from his own building, Alana's assistant handed her an envelope. Inside, hospital test results and a custody agreement Victoria had prepared. The baby she carried wasn't just Mason's heir. It was the key to everything. She carried the future of his bloodline in her womb and the power to destroy his legacy in her hands. Mason Drake had never been more at her mercy. The doctor's office felt different this time, not as a place of vulnerability, but as the location where she would change the course of two empires. Dr. Martinez smiled as she reviewed the test results, unaware that the papers in her hands held enough power to topple governments, or at least one very arrogant oil CEO. "Congratulations, Ms. Brooks. You're about 12 weeks along. Everything looks perfectly healthy." 12 weeks. That put conception right around the night of the thunderstorm, when her contract had transformed into something real in his study. When he'd whispered her name like a prayer, and she believed that maybe, just maybe, this fake marriage might become something worth keeping. "I'd like copies of everything," Alana said, her hand unconsciously moving to her still flat stomach. "All the blood work, ultrasound images, date confirmations. Everything." The doctor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course. Is everything all right?" "Everything's about to be perfect." 2 hours later, Alana sat in her new office, Mason's old office, reviewing quarterly reports when her assistant buzzed through. "Ms. Brooks? Mr. Drake is here. He says it's urgent. Send him in." Mason entered like a man walking to his execution, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked dangerously close to desperation. He'd lost weight in the past month, his suits hanging looser than his usual tailored perfection. "The pregnancy rumors," he said without preamble. "Are they true?" Alana leaned back in the leather chair that had once been his throne. "Sit down, Mason. Just answer the question." "Sit down." He sat, and for a moment she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm pregnant." The color drained from his face. "Is it mine?" The question hung between them like a loaded weapon. She could lie, could tell him it belonged to some imaginary lover, could watch him destroy himself with uncertainty. But lies were his weapon of choice, not hers. "DNA test will confirm it, but yes, it's yours." Mason's hands shook as he gripped the arms of his chair. "Why didn't you tell me? What would have been a good time? Before or after you call me your contract wife in front of 500 people? He flinched like she'd slapped him. "Alana, You what? You're sorry? You were protecting your reputation? You panicked." She stood, moving to the windows that showcased the city spread below them like a conquered kingdom. "I was going to tell you that night. I had the pregnancy test in my purse, ready to share the news after your speech about our partnership. Our partnership was real. Our partnership was convenient." She turned to face him, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. "But this baby changes everything. This child will inherit both our names, both our legacies. The question is, what kind of legacy do you want to leave?" Mason stood, crossing the room until he was close enough to touch. "Let me be part of this. Please. You'll have to earn that right." How do you balance protecting your children from toxic people while still allowing them to know their heritage? Share your thoughts on complicated family dynamics. Victoria's final card was played with surgical precision, medical records proving Alana had been on birth control when she signed the contract. "Fraud," Victoria smiled. "Unless, of course, the baby isn't his at all. Some lies protect, and some lies destroy. But the truth about that baby would either save their love or end it forever. The genetic testing facility seemed too sterile for the messy human drama playing out within its walls, too clean for the dirty accusations being thrown around like grenades in a war zone. Victoria sat in the corner with her lawyer, looking like a cat who'd cornered a mouse, while Mason paced the waiting room like a caged animal. Alana sat perfectly still, her hands folded over the slight curve of her belly that was just beginning to show. 16 weeks now, and the baby had become real in ways that went beyond medical tests and legal documents. This was her child, whether Mason claimed it or not. The birth control records are clear, Victoria's lawyer said, brandishing papers like weapons. My client has proof that Ms. Brooks was taking contraceptives when she signed the contract. Either she lied about the timeline, or the paternity is in question. My client doesn't need to prove anything, Alana's lawyer replied smoothly. Mr. Drake is welcome to waive his parental rights if he has doubts. Mason stopped pacing. I'm not waiving anything. Then you believe the baby is yours? Victoria asked, her voice sharp with frustration. I believe Alana wouldn't lie about something this important. The simple statement hit Alana like a physical blow. After everything, the humiliation, the betrayal, the corporate warfare, he still trusted her word. It was the first glimpse of the man she'd fallen in love with during those stolen moments between contract and reality. How touching, Victoria said, her voice dripping poison. But belief doesn't hold up in court. DNA does. The test results arrived 3 hours later. Dr. Patterson, the genetic specialist, opened the sealed envelope with the kind of professional calm that came from delivering life-changing news on a regular basis. The probability of paternity is 99.97%. Mr. Drake, you're the biological father. Victoria's face went white, then red, then white again. Her lawyer shuffled papers frantically, looking for another angle of attack that didn't exist. As for the birth control question, Dr. Patterson continued, contraceptives are effective but not perfect. Breakthrough pregnancies occur in approximately 3% of users, particularly during times of high stress or irregular schedules. Mason was staring at the ultrasound image clipped to the test results. Their baby, tiny but perfect, floating in a world of possibilities. When he looked up at Alana, his eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously like hope. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for doubting you. For all of it. Doubt wasn't the problem, Alana replied, her voice steady despite the emotion churning in her chest. Cowardice was. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor like nails on a chalkboard. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Mason said without looking away from Alana. Whatever we were, whatever we might have been, it's done. My future is with my family now. For the first time since the Houston Gala, Alana allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild something from the ashes of what they destroyed. Have you ever had to choose between believing someone you love or protecting yourself from potential hurt? What made the difference? With Victoria discredited and the baby's paternity confirmed, Mason thought his problems were over. He didn't know that Alana had recorded every conversation, every humiliation, every moment of their relationship, and she was about to use them in ways he never imagined. From the ashes of his arrogance and her humiliation, they built something neither could have created alone, a love that looked like justice and felt like home. The new company headquarters gleamed with purpose, its community outreach center a testament to what happens when privilege meets principle. 6 months after the DNA results, Mason and Alana had transformed Drake Industries from a profit-focused oil company into a model for sustainable business practices that actually made more money than the old methods. The quarterly reports are in, Alana announced during their morning strategy meeting, her pregnancy now visibly rounding her figure at 24 weeks. Revenue is up 47%, public approval is at an all-time high, and we just landed the Richardson environmental contract worth $80 million. Mason looked up from the architectural plans for their third community clinic, genuine pride shining in his eyes. Your idea or mine? Ours, she corrected, and the simple word carried weight they both understood. No more his company or her revenge. Just their shared vision for what business could accomplish when it served people instead of just profit. The transformation hadn't been easy. Board meetings where former allies questioned every decision. Media interviews where reporters tried to reduce their story to scandal instead of recognizing the innovation. Sleepless nights planning initiatives that would prove their partnership was about more than damage control. But somewhere between launching scholarship programs for underprivileged students and creating healthcare clinics in underserved communities, their fake marriage had become real partnership built on mutual respect rather than desperate need. "There's something else," Alana said, sliding a folder across the conference table. "The mayor called. They want to name the new community center after your mother." Mason's breath caught. His mother had died when he was 12, a victim of inadequate health care because insurance wouldn't cover her cancer treatment. Building clinics that provided care regardless of ability to pay had been his way of honoring her memory. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "Because I pay attention now instead of just cleaning around your grief." She moved to stand beside his chair, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Because I understand what it means to watch someone you love suffer because the system fails them." He covered her hand with his, their wedding rings, real ones this time, chosen together instead of selected for performance, catching the morning light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. "We're not just rebuilding a company," she said, reviewing expansion plans spread across the table. "We're proving that power shared is power multiplied." Their afternoon was spent touring the construction site of their newest project, a combination medical clinic, job training center, and daycare facility designed to break the cycle of poverty by addressing multiple needs simultaneously. Alana moved through the space with the confidence of someone who'd learned to command rooms instead of just cleaning them. "Mrs. Drake," the construction foreman called out, then caught himself. "Sorry, Ms. Brooks Drake." She kept both names after their remarriage, a decision that sparked controversy but felt right to them. She was honoring her journey from Brooks to Drake and back to herself, while creating something new that belonged to both of them. That evening, they celebrated another successful day in their shared office space, formerly his domain, now designed with 2 desks facing each other so they could work as partners instead of hierarchy. The intimacy that followed was different from their desperate early encounters or even their passionate reconciliation. This was celebration between equals, 2 people who'd learned to build together instead of tearing each other down. "I love you," Mason whispered against her hair as they held each other afterward, city lights painting patterns on their skin through the windows. "I know," she replied, then smiled at his surprised expression. "I also love you. But more than that, I respect you, and you respect me. That's what makes this real." What does true partnership look like to you? When both people bring equal value but different strengths. The wedding invitation arrived at Victoria's penthouse with a personal note. "You taught us that contracts can be broken, but real commitment chooses itself every day. Thank you for showing us the difference." This time when she walked down the aisle, it wasn't for money or contracts. It was for love that had been tested by fire and emerged as gold. The church in her hometown of Atlanta bloomed with flowers and faces of people who'd watched her grow from struggling girl to powerful woman. Unlike their first wedding, a sterile courthouse ceremony witnessed by strangers, this celebration overflowed with community, family, and friends who understood the journey that had brought them to this moment. Alana's mother sat in the front row, healthy and radiant after her successful treatment, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks as she watched her daughter prepare to marry for love instead of survival. The medical bills that had once seemed impossible were long paid, but the gratitude in her eyes was payment enough for every humiliation Alana had endured. "You sure about this, baby girl?" her mother had asked that morning while helping with the simple white dress that cost a fraction of her first wedding gown, but meant infinitely more. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Alana had replied, her hands steady as she fastened her grandmother's pearl necklace. Something old, something meaningful, something that connected her to the women who'd taught her that dignity couldn't be bought or sold. Mason stood at the altar in a navy suit, his usual arrogance replaced by something that looked like gratitude. His best man wasn't some business associate chosen for networking potential, but his cousin David, the only family member who'd supported him through the scandal and recovery. The music began, and Alana walked down the aisle alone by choice, not because no one would give her away, but because she was giving herself freely to someone who'd earned the gift. Each step carried the weight of their complicated history and the promise of their chosen future. When she reached the altar, Mason's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Hi," he whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. "Hi yourself," she whispered back, and suddenly the church full of people faded away until it was just the two of them, choosing each other again despite everything they'd survived. Pastor Williams, who'd baptized Alana as a baby, smiled at the couple before him. "Mason and Alana have chosen to write their own vows." Mason cleared his throat, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "Alana, I hired you to play a role, but you taught me what it means to be real. I humiliated you in public, but you showed me what dignity looks like. I thought I was buying your performance, but you gave me your heart anyway. I promise to spend the rest of my life proving that I understand the difference between owning someone and cherishing them." There wasn't a dry eye in the church as Alana responded, her voice clear and strong. "Mason, you offered me a contract when I needed salvation, but you gave me something more valuable. You gave me the chance to discover my own worth. You broke my heart, but in healing, it became stronger. You try to buy my love, but I'm giving it to you free because that's what real love does. I promise to build with you, not for you, and to choose us every single day." The rings they exchanged were simple gold bands engraved with words that had become their motto: partnership over possession. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Mason's kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promises they both intended to keep. The congregation erupted in applause that shook the old church's rafters, celebrating not just a wedding, but a victory of love over circumstances, dignity over desperation. The reception was held in the community center they'd funded together, their first joint project and the foundation of everything they were building. Instead of expensive catering, local families provided dishes that told the story of their shared community. Instead of string quartets, a local gospel choir filled the space with music that celebrated resilience and redemption. Every touch was a promise. Every kiss an apology for the time they'd wasted pretending their hearts weren't involved. "Mrs. Brooks Drake," he whispered, and this time the title sounded like worship instead of ownership. "Do you believe people can completely transform their relationship dynamics? Share your thoughts on second chances and real change." During the honeymoon in Greece, she felt the familiar flutter in her stomach. Not nerves this time, but new life. Baby number 2 was already making its presence known, and this pregnancy would be different in every way that mattered. The body that once carried a child from obligation now created life from celebration. The ultimate proof that love changes everything, even biology. The nursery walls glowed with warm yellow paint and hand-drawn murals of Georgia peach trees and Texas bluebonnets. 2 states, 1 love story. At 32 weeks pregnant with her second child, Alana moved through the space with the glowing confidence of a woman carrying life created from joy rather than contract obligations. "Mama, is the baby coming today?" asked 3-year-old Maya, their daughter who'd been born 7 months after the DNA test that confirmed Mason's paternity. Maya had her father's green eyes and her mother's determination, plus a smile that could charm anyone within a 50-mile radius. "Not today, sweetheart," Alana laughed, settling into the rocking chair Mason had built by hand, his first attempt at woodworking and a surprisingly beautiful result. But soon, Maya climbed on her lap with the careful precision of a child who'd been taught that Mama's belly was special. "Will the new baby help with the clinic like Daddy does?" "Maybe someday," Alana said, smoothing her daughter's dark curls. "What do you think the baby will want to do?" "Help people," Maya said with absolute certainty. "Like you and Daddy do." The Drake Foundation had expanded beyond anyone's expectations in 3 years. Medical clinics in 5 states, scholarship programs that had sent over 200 students to college, job training centers that boasted an 85% placement rate, and childcare facilities that allowed parents to work without worrying about their children's safety. Mason found them there an hour later, returning from the ribbon-cutting ceremony for their newest facility in Houston, the same city where their marriage had nearly ended, now home to their most successful community outreach program. "How did it go?" Alana asked, accepting his kiss and noting the happiness in his eyes. 300 people showed up. The mayor gave a speech about how the Drake model should be implemented nationally. And Mrs. Patterson, remember her from the country club? She volunteered to coordinate the senior services program. Mrs. Patterson, who used to whisper about my background? The same one. Turns out, respect grows when people see results instead of just rumors. Maya launched herself at her father, who caught her with practiced ease. "Daddy, Mama says the baby might help at the clinic." "The baby will do whatever makes them happy," Mason said, lifting Maya to his shoulders. "Just like you will." That evening, after Maya was asleep, they sat in their home office reviewing expansion plans for the foundation. Not the penthouse where their relationship had begun, but a house they'd chosen together, spacious enough for their growing family, but grounded in the community they served. "The Richardson family wants to fund another clinic," Alana reported, her hands absently stroking her rounded belly where the baby seemed to be practicing gymnastics. "This one focused specifically on maternal health care." Mason looked up from budget reports, his expression thoughtful. "Because of your story?" "Because they understand that access to health care shouldn't depend on your bank account or your zip code." She shifted uncomfortably as the baby delivered a particularly strong kick. "This little one is definitely your child, already making demands." He moved to kneel beside her chair, his hands joining hers on her belly. The baby quieted at his touch, as if recognizing the voice that read bedtime stories and sang off-key lullabies. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted quietly. "A family, a purpose beyond profit. Someone who challenges me to be better instead of just richer." "You have it because you chose it," Alana replied. "Every day, you choose us over easier options. That's what makes you different from the man who hired a maid to play his wife." How do you explain complicated adult situations to children in ways they can understand and be proud of their story? The phone call came at 2 a.m. Victoria had been found dead in her penthouse, and the police wanted to question both of them about her final months. Even in death, she threatened to destroy what they'd built. Dead women tell no tales, but they leave behind evidence. And Victoria's last secret could still tear apart everything Mason and Alana had created. The police station's harsh lighting couldn't dim the glow between them. Two people who'd learned that love tested becomes love strengthened. Detective Rodriguez looked tired as she reviewed the file spread across the metal table, photographs and documents that painted a picture of obsession and desperation that had ultimately consumed Victoria Ashford. "When was the last time either of you spoke with Ms. Ashford?" Detective Rodriguez asked, her pen poised over a notepad that had seen better days. 3 years ago, Mason replied, his hand finding Alana's across the table. "At the DNA testing facility. She tried to contest paternity, but when the results proved Maya was mine, she left, and we never heard from her again. According to her phone records, she called both your offices multiple times over the past 6 months. No one returned the calls." Alana shifted uncomfortably, her 8 months pregnant belly making the plastic chair feel like torture. "Our staff was instructed not to put her through. We moved on with our lives and wanted to keep it that way." Detective Rodriguez nodded, making notes. "The medical examiner ruled it's suicide. Pills and alcohol. But her apartment was filled with newspaper clippings about your foundation, photos from your wedding, detailed financial records of your company's growth. She'd been tracking your every move." "We had no idea," Mason said, and the genuine shock in his voice was unmistakable. "There's more." The detective opened another folder. "She'd hired a private investigator to dig up information about your current employees, your business partners, your foundation's donors. She was building some kind of case." Alana's blood ran cold. "A case for what?" "That's what we're trying to figure out." Her laptop had files titled Fraud Evidence and Criminal Conspiracy. Did she ever threaten to expose business practices or personal information? Victoria threatened a lot of things, Alana said carefully, but she never had anything substantial because there was nothing to find. Our books are audited quarterly. Our foundation is transparent about every dollar spent, and our marriage is exactly what it appears to be. Detective Rodriguez studied them both with the calculating gaze of someone who'd seen enough lies to recognize truth. Her suicide note mentions both of you specifically. She claimed that your success was built on deception and that she couldn't live knowing the truth would never come out. The interview continued for another hour, but it became clear that Victoria's obsession had been built on fantasy rather than fact. Her private investigator confirmed that despite months of searching, he'd found no evidence of wrongdoing. Just two people who transformed personal scandal into professional success while building something meaningful for their community. Driving home afterward, they sat in comfortable silence until Mason spoke. I feel sorry for her. Saudi? Alana asked, surprised. She spent 3 years destroying herself over something that was never really about her. We found love, she found obsession. We built something together. She tore herself apart alone. Her choices weren't your responsibility, Alana reminded him gently. I know, but I wish she'd found something else to focus on. Someone who could have made her happy instead of bitter. How do you move forward when toxic people try to control your story even after they're gone? Share your experiences with cutting ties completely. With Victoria's threats finally buried, Mason had one last surprise for Alana. A deed to the community center in Atlanta where she dreamed of making a difference, now bearing both their names and ready to change lives. From a desperate Maid signing a contract to survive to a powerful CEO building empire with a man who learned to see her worth. This is what happens when dignity refuses to be bought. The community center buzzed with children's laughter and parents' hope. The sound of dreams being rebuilt with resources and respect working together. 5 years after their first contract, Alana stood in the main hall of the Viola Brooks Community Center, named after her mother, watching their 2 children play with kids from every background imaginable. Maya, now 8 and wise beyond her years, was helping 5-year-old Marcus, their son born 3 months after Victoria's death, navigate the jungle gym with the patient kindness that made both parents proud. Around them, families who'd found jobs through their training programs, received health care through their clinics, and sent children to college through their scholarships celebrated another successful year of community partnership. 537 families served this year, reported Jennifer, the center director who'd grown up in this same neighborhood. Unemployment in the area is down to 3%, teen pregnancy rates have dropped 40%, and we have a waiting list for the college prep program. Mason wrapped his arms around Alana from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched their children represent the future they'd built together. No longer the desperate Maid and arrogant CEO who'd signed a contract born from mutual need, but partners who'd learned to create rather than just take. Remember when you asked me what I'd change if I had the resources? Alana asked, leaning back against his chest. You said you'd make sure no woman ever had to choose between dignity and survival, he replied, his voice warm with memory. Look around, she said softly. We did that. The evening celebration continued with presentations from scholarship recipients, testimonials from families whose lives have been changed, and performances by the community choir that Maya insisted on joining despite inheriting her father's questionable musical abilities. Later, after the crowd had gone home and the children were asleep in the car, Mason and Alana found themselves alone in the center's main hall. Moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating photographs on the walls that told the story of transformation. Before and after pictures of the neighborhood, graduation photos of scholarship recipients, family portraits of people who'd found stability through their programs. No regrets, Mason asked, pulling her into his arms for a slow dance to music only they could hear. About the contract? About the humiliation? About Victoria's obsession? Alana considered the question seriously. No, every terrible thing led us here. To this community, to our children, to understanding that love isn't about rescue. It's about recognition. They moved together with the easy rhythm of people who'd learned to complement each other's strengths rather than compete. Her head fit perfectly against his shoulder. His hand rested naturally on the curve of her back. And for a moment, they were just two people who'd chosen each other despite every reason not to. "I love you," he whispered against her hair, the words carrying weight accumulated over years of proving them true. "I know," she replied, then smiled at his surprised chuckle. "I also love you. But more than that, I respect you. And you respect me. That's what makes this last." Their children slept peacefully in the back seat during the drive home, faces soft with innocence and possibility. Maya clutched a science fair ribbon she'd won for a project about renewable energy, while Marcus held his favorite book about a little boy who grew up to build bridges between different worlds. "What do you think they'll do when they grow up?" Mason asked, glancing in the rearview mirror at their legacy sleeping soundly. "Whatever they want," Alana replied with absolute certainty. "Because they'll grow up knowing their worth isn't determined by what they own, but by what they build. They'll know that real power comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down." She moved above him with the confidence of a woman who knew her worth, loved by a man who'd learned to recognize value beyond price tags. "Thank you," she whispered against his lips. "For what?" "For proving that love doesn't buy people, it builds them." What's the most important lesson you've learned about love and respect? Share your wisdom in the comments below. If this story of transformation and true love moved you, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to let circumstances define their worth. Tell me in the comments what part of Mason and Alana's journey inspired you most. Remember, the best love stories aren't about rescue. They're about recognition. Until next time, keep believing in the power of dignity, determination, and love that sees your true value.